Welcome back to Let's Fear Japanese Horror. As mentioned in the introduction, we can hardly delve into a video series that puts a special focus on the uncanny without first defining how the term should be understood. And so, as promised, in this video we will take a look at the German word for uncanny, unheimlich. Our definition will be based on two German essays, A. Zur Psychologie des Unheimlichen, which roughly translates to Regarding the Psychology of the Uncanny. This one was written by Ernst Jentsch in 1906, and B. Das Unheimliche, which literally translates to The Uncanny, written by Sigmund Freud in 1919. We will start with Jentsch, who first directs our attention to the morphological structure of the word unheimlich itself. The first part of this word is un, a prefix that expresses negation here and also exists in English. Just think of words like undecided, undetected, or uncanny. The second part is heimlich, which in turn consists of heim, this means home, and lich, which is similar to the English suffix li or the word like here. So it's basically a combination of un and home-like, with home-like here meaning something that is like your home or that makes you feel at home. Therefore, you could say that unheimlich or uncanny is the negation of something that makes you feel at home. To quote Jentsch himself, "A person who deems something unheimlich, unhomelike, is not quite at home with regards to the thing or event that causes this feeling. It is foreign to them, or at least it appears to be. In other words, the term suggests that the uncanny feeling caused by an object or an occurrence is directly linked to a lack of orientation." Quote end. Things that are familiar to us, things that we are accustomed to, are usually pleasant for us, explains Jentsch. They fill us with a feeling of security, we prefer them, and we even come to take them for granted. On the other hand, the unknown, the unfamiliar, anything that is new to us can easily evoke a different set of emotions. It's prone to cause suspicion, uncertainty, insecurity, and can ultimately lead us down the path to the uncanny. But why did I say can and not will? Well, not everything new or unknown will automatically make us feel scared. When faced with the unknown, this can also lead to other reactions, such as, for example, scientific curiosity. So then, what exactly is it that adds the quality of uncanniness to something new or unknown? According to Jentsch, the main factor here is what he calls intellectual insecurity. When something that we are usually familiar with, something where we usually feel at home, or something that we usually take for granted, suddenly appears in a new light which causes us to reconsider and feel unpleasant uncertainty. This, so Jentsch, is where we can experience the above-mentioned lack of orientation that will cause us to perceive something as unheimlich, unhomelike, uncanny. But wait, does that mean only things we already personally know can become uncanny? No. I don't think the connection to familiarity needs to be taken that literally. It can also suffice to be familiar with the concept of something and to then encounter a version of that concept where this feeling of familiarity is lost in a way that makes us feel uneasy, insecure, or uncertain. For example, a weird face like this one can be uncanny, but it's not like we need to be personally familiar and acquainted with the normal version of this particular face before it can become uncanny to us. No, this one works because we are familiar with the concept of normal faces. We know what faces regularly look like, so if we see something that goes against this familiar concept, it can become uncanny. Now, Ernst Jentsch goes on to highlight one factor as particularly powerful when it comes to evoking the uncanny, which is, I quote, "the doubt about whether an entity that appears to be alive actually has a soul, and vice versa, the doubt whether an inanimate object might not actually contain a soul." Quote end. A great example of this would be dolls or statues. Granted, not everyone reacts to them this way, but quite a lot of people find them creepy, especially if they allow doubts such as these into their mind. Say, for instance, you have a doll on a shelf that's positioned so that it always looks into your direction. Usually you don't mind, but one day you cannot help but look back at it a little longer than usual, and suddenly certain thoughts are beginning to creep into your mind as you look at its glaring eyes, wondering if it's really just an inanimate object. Those eyes that have been staring at you for so long, perhaps they are actually sentient in some way. I think you get the idea. Another doll-related example is what robotics professor Mori Masahiro in 1970 called Bukimi no Tani Gensho, or the Uncanny Valley phenomenon. I know this looks kind of complicated, but in short, it describes how our acceptance of the outward appearance of anthropomorphic dolls, robots, and the like does not continuously increase when they become more and more human-like. Instead, when a certain point is reached where they seem almost perfectly human-like and yet something is missing, this is where our acceptance takes a deep dive and we enter the uncanny valley. Suddenly, we find them creepy. Now, for Jentzsch, another factor that can evoke the uncanny is how much sense something makes to us. If a certain wondrous action appears to have some value or purpose to it, then our response will drift towards pleasant feelings of admiration, even if it is an action that we ourselves are unfamiliar with. Jentzsch gives two examples. A surgeon on the one hand, whose complicated surgical performances might seem quite wondrous and beyond our comprehension, will nonetheless be met with applause and appreciation. We don't usually consider a surgeon's feats to be uncanny, but a fakir who lets himself be buried alive will probably give rise to quite different emotions. Jentzsch also mentions further examples, such as the feeling of uncertainty that kicks in when we perceive strange or peculiar noises and are not sure if they are simply caused by something mundane or if they belong to some sort of unknown creature, showing once more that doubt, uncertainty, and feelings of insecurity contribute a lot to the uncanny. Alright, here I'd like to conclude the discussion of Ernst Jentzsch's essay. Next, let us see what Sigmund Freud has to say in his essay Das Unheimliche. First off, Freud mentions that he has read Ernst Jentzsch's essay zur Psychologie des Unheimlichen and he calls it rich in content but also not exhaustive. Freud criticizes that Jentzsch does not venture further beyond his idea of the uncanny as the result of intellectual insecurity. Parallel to Jentzsch, Freud also starts off with a close look at the morphological structure of the word unheimlich. Remember, Jentzsch concluded that it consists of un, home, and like, but Freud takes particular interest in the etymology behind the word heimlich. He acknowledges that heimlich can mean something like at home, and unheimlich can thus be interpreted as the negation of anything that makes us feel at home, but Freud then points us toward another meaning of heimlich, because the German word heimlich can actually also refer to something that is hidden, something secret. Let's say some politicians hold a clandestine meeting. In German, we would translate clandestine here as heimlich. In this context, heimlich isn't something that we're at home with, it's something that should stay hidden inside a metaphorical home. Freud underlines this by quoting a certain philosopher called Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling, who once wrote, "Uncanny is all that which should have been kept secret, should have stayed hidden, but has somehow emerged and come to light." Quote end. So for Freud, the source of the uncanny is the emergence of repressed memories, repressed thoughts, repressed urges, and the emergence of old ways of thinking that we thought to have overcome. He explains, "What we call uncanny is not something new or foreign, but rather something that has been familiar to our psyche for a long time, but has become strange to us through the process of repression." Of course, Freud, being Freud, uses this opportunity to talk about his own psychoanalytic theories and offers repressed infantile complexes, such as castration anxiety as an example of the above, but he also elaborates on the topic of re-emerging beliefs that we thought to have overcome, such as animism or the belief in magic and the like. The point about animism is particularly interesting. Very roughly explained, animism is the belief that not just humans, but all things have a soul, even objects and phenomena, and the belief in animism in particular is a phase that every human experiences and usually overcomes during their development, at least according to Freud, and that is why Freud claims we also consider things as uncanny that reawaken or stir the remains of this repressed belief that still sleeps in our unconscious mind even after we have overcome it. So the fact that some people find dolls creepy could also be understood against this background. If it is true that most people once held but then eventually discarded the belief that even objects have a soul, then the sight of a doll might bring back what's left of this belief. And following Freud's definition, it would then be this re-emerging of a belief that has become estranged to us that causes us to perceive the doll as uncanny. Now, there is still more to Freud's essay, but those were the main points that I wanted to present to you in the scope of this series. In my opinion, both essays raise valid points, and while Freud seems to disagree with some of Jens's ideas, I don't think they need to be mutually exclusive. Let me try to combine and summarize them as follows. We can experience the uncanny when something familiar to us suddenly appears in a new and unfamiliar light, causing a certain intellectual insecurity in us. We can experience it if something unfamiliar begins to invade whatever we consider our familiar space, when something unknown creeps into any kind of literal or metaphorical room in which we usually feel at home, thus turning what was heimlich or home-like into unheimlich, unhome-like. Furthermore, if something causes us to feel uncertainty about its animate or inanimate qualities, this can also lead directly to the uncanny. Finally, we can experience it when something repressed, something that should have stayed hidden, emerges and disrupts our feeling of being at home. For anything repressed that surfaces from our unconscious mind will in that moment be somewhat familiar, yet also strange, since the act of repression has estranged us from it. Overall, the uncanny is an elusive and of course fairly subjective emotion that can take on a multitude of forms and will therefore, at least in my opinion, be impossible to pinpoint 100%. It is like a nebulous cloud, the shape of which we can vaguely describe, but everyone's description and perception of it may vary slightly depending on their frame of mind and point of view. Still, I think all of what was discussed in this video certainly gives us a good framework to operate with. And now, if I were to give one final and as brief as possible definition of how I would like the uncanny to be understood in this series, then it would be as follows. The uncanny can arise if something that we experience is invaded by an element of the unknown, which causes us to feel an uncertainty of unpleasant quality. Again, even this may not be a perfect definition, but it should capture most of the different ideas that were brought up in this chapter. And with that, I shall conclude this video. Oh, wait, no, there's one last thing. I did want to take a quick look at the English word uncanny as well. So, uncanny consists of un, the prefix for negation, and canny, which in turn comes from the verb can and the suffix e that turns words into adjectives. But this is not can in the sense of to be able to, as in I can dance. Instead, it goes back all the way to the Old English first and third person singular present indicative of to know. Granted, the term canny went through various meanings throughout time, but as far as I can see, our current use of the word uncanny does go back to the meaning of can in the sense of to know, and so uncanny basically refers to something that is beyond our ken, something unknown, something unfamiliar to us, which ties the English word to the feeling of uncertainty as well. And while we're at it, what about Japanese? Well, one of the words that is frequently used in Japanese to refer to anything uncanny is bukimi. This term actually appeared earlier in this video when we talked about the Bukimi no Tanigensho, the uncanny valley phenomenon. It can be split into bu and kimi. Now, kimi consists of ki, which here refers to things like mind or consciousness, and mi, which usually means taste, and here by extension refers to sensing something with your body. Therefore, kimi is often used to refer to the sensation something gives you via your mind or your body. Bu here stands for negation or negative quality, and so bukimi can refer to anything that gives us unpleasant sensations and anything that is beyond all that which we can sense or understand. So in the end, this too is related to the unknown, to uncertainty, insecurity, unpleasant feelings, and so on. And with that, we have truly reached the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one, where we will finally begin to explore horror and the uncanny in Japanese literature. Take care and goodbye.